One-man game.
It's showtime, folks!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Through the Waiver Wire. It is episode 5, week 6. Let's hop right into it. First off, we have wide receiver Sammy Coates of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last week he had 11 targets for 139 yards and a touchdown. Sammy Coates has stepped up big time this season. I mean, looking at that game, he dropped another short touchdown. So really he should have come out of that game with 2 touchdowns. But with that being said, he has taken advantage of an enormous opportunity. Marcus Wheaton hasn't been all that great, and Eli Rogers has been hurt. So Sammy Coates has been the next guy up, and he's the second receiver behind Antonio Brown. I mean, he's going to have consistent production each week, and I recommend putting him first on your waiver wire claim. And with the way that offense is ran, I can see Coates putting up big numbers or close to big numbers each week. Next up is Chris Hogan, who seemingly out of nowhere had a huge game, and I mean, let's face it, he wasn't doing anything for pretty much the whole season, but Tom Brady came back and worked his magic. I mean, there are so many options on this New England Patriots team, but looking at Chris Hogan's stats, he had 5 targets for 114 yards. That isn't a lot of targets to be comfortable with, but Tom Brady might be going for 300 yards or so each game, so he's going to have his chances because he's a deep threat down the field, and he might just be the New England Patriots' best deep threat. So he might have 1 or 2 chunk plays a game, but it's really risky, going after these deep threat players. As I've mentioned, that I feel uncomfortable going with guys that only get a couple of targets a game due to deep threats, because they can be boom or bust each week. But looking at New England, Chris Hogan is one of many options in that game, and one of many options in that passing game, and he has a chance going forward to put up big numbers. So I would recommend picking him up and not necessarily starting him this week, because I would like to see how the situation works out with all of those passing options that are there. You got Martellus Bennett, Gronk, Edelman, and I mean Dion Lewis is coming back eventually, so that's going to be a tricky situation. So I definitely recommend picking him up, but I wait to see how the situation works out. Next up on the list is Brian Hoyer. I mean, surprise, surprise. Who would have thought that Brian Hoyer would be amongst the guys that would be on the list to claim? I mean, it's surprising because the guy has thrown for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, at least 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in 3 straight weeks. He had 397 yards last week. I mean, I know it was against the Colts, but still, that's a ton of yards. And it looks like Brian Hoyer, I mean, if you're desperate at quarterback, if you have injuries, if you're dealing with Carson Palmer, Cam Newton, I mean, Cam may or may not be back, we'll see. But if you have one of those guys and you want to pick up Brian Hoyer as insurance, I would definitely recommend picking him up. And looking at his matchup this week, he has the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they are ranked 27th against the pass. So it's looking like another really good week for Brian Hoyer. And I would recommend playing him over many quarterbacks this week. If you have quarterback problems, I would recommend picking him up and playing him, as he has a tremendous matchup. Sticking in Chicago, next up we have Cameron Meredith. And this guy really came out of nowhere. I mean, 12 targets for 130 yards and 1 touchdown. He had a phenomenal game last week. Everyone was wondering who would step up once Kevin White got hurt, and everyone figured that, maybe it'll be Eddie Royal that would be the guy that would take his place. And Eddie Royal has been doing well enough, but last week it was Meredith that had a fantastic game, and he got double the targets that Alshon Jeffrey did, and that could be due to Vontae Davis or whatnot. Or if you look at the past few weeks, Brian Hoyer has really been avoiding Alshon Jeffrey for whatever reason, and he's been going to the other receivers, as Kevin White was getting those targets over Alshon Jeffrey for many weeks. Well, for the weeks leading up until he got hurt. So looking at this situation, it looks like Hoyer is gonna give Meredith all of the opportunity in the world to put up stats. And as I just mentioned, they have a favorable matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Cameron Meredith very well could put up another performance like he had last week, but it's relatively hard to count on because it's just one game. It could be another great performance, or it could be a flash in the pan. I'd recommend picking him up, and I'd wait to see what happens from here on out. Next up is my streaming defense and streaming kicker of the week. For my streaming defense, I'm going to go with the Tennessee Titans, and for my streaming kicker, I am going to go with Will Lutz of the New Orleans Saints. That is it, and that is all. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully, I will see you next week for the episode 6, week 7 edition of Through the Waiver Wire.